Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and we are now in my favorite month of the year. It's May. May is my birthday month, and I'm so excited. We're also on to the next reading challenge, and the challenge for May is to read books that are set in Spain. So I chose Spain for May because Spain is my favorite country, and I actually lived there for about a year. I studied abroad there for 1/4 as an undergrad. I lived in Leon for 3 months, and it was a wonderful experience. Then a year or two later, I did my whole master's degree in Spain, in Valencia. And so I really love Spain. It's a place that is close to my heart and a place that I'd love to go back to and eventually live in someday. Now, because of my obsession with Spain, I have acquired a lot of books that are set in the country. So for this video, I'm going to talk about some of the books that I've read that are set in Spain that I recommend that you read, as well as a bunch of the books that are on my TBR that I'm excited to read, and maybe you will be too. Okay, so let's get right to it. My first recommendation is a book called Incantation by Alice Hoffman. She's a very well-known author, and this book is actually a YA novel. I read it about 8 years ago, and it's set in the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition. It's set in Spain around 1500, and it follows a young girl and her family who is Jewish, and the kind of challenges that they're going through as their country goes through these major changes, and the dangers that she and her family face. It's a short and quick novel, so it's one you can read pretty quickly, but it definitely has a lot of value to it, and personally I learned a lot about the Spanish Inquisition while reading this. I didn't know much about it before reading it, but I've definitely learned a lot since then, so this is a book that I definitely recommend. Next up, I have a duology by Karina Hall. The first one is Love in English, and the second one is Love in Spanish. So these two books follow a girl who has just finished her college degree, and she decides to leave her home in Canada and go to Spain to teach conversational English to some business people for a few weeks while she's living just outside of Madrid. While she's there, she meets a man and they start a relationship despite having a lot of differences between them. So the first book follows the beginning of the relationship, and the second book follows some different challenges that they face later on. I really love both of these books, and I think I also identified with them a little bit more because they more closely mirrored my experience. I did study abroad in Spain, and so I had that kind of learning experience. In her case, she's actually teaching other people English, but regardless, it felt a little bit similar, so I really enjoyed these books, and I definitely recommend them if you want a little bit of a romance that is set in Spain. Another book that I highly recommend is The Time in Between by Maria Duynos. The author is Spanish, and this book is translated from Spanish. Now, I will warn you, this is about 600 pages long, so it is a bit of a commitment, but it's really worth it. It's beautifully written. It follows a girl who is kind of naive and a little bit not sure what to do with her life in Madrid, and she ends up following this guy down to Morocco, and some bad things happen and she ends up kind of alone and not sure what to do now that she's in Morocco. Meanwhile, her home country is entering the Spanish Civil War, and World War II is breaking out across Europe. While this is all unfolding, she starts to rise up and come into her own, become a self-sufficient woman, and eventually she starts working as a secret agent who helps with ending World War II. So it's a really fascinating novel, kind of a coming of age, but also turns into a kind of war novel. It's really well done and beautifully written, and I very highly recommend this one. A few years ago, I read a book called The Sisterhood by Helen and Bryan. This was a gift from my sister, and I really like this one. Like Incantation, this one is set during the Spanish Inquisition. One timeline is set in the early 1500s, and it follows a convent and a group of nuns, including one girl who was sent to be there against her will. Eventually, they escape and end up in South America, I think in Peru, although it doesn't specify where exactly. And in the other timeline, it's set in 2000, and it follows a girl who is looking for answers. She was adopted, and she wants to know more about her family history, so she ends up in Spain. And it's really interesting seeing how the past and the present eventually converge into a really interesting story. So I did like this one a lot. It looks like there's a lot of research that went into it, and it was just a really moving story, and I definitely recommend this one. Right around the same time I read the previous book, I read The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. This one is also set around the Spanish Inquisition, but it's set in a fantasy version of Spain. It's during the reign of the last Sultan of Andalusia, and it follows a young woman who is a concubine and her friend at the palace who is a map maker, a magical map maker, and they eventually escape from the palace with the help of a djinn, and they're on a mission to find a place that may or may not exist. This is an action-packed and fun story. It's full of adventure and magic, and I just found it to be really delightful. I really love this book, and I've actually been searching for more books like this one with a fantasy set in Spain. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know, because I'd love to read more books like this one. But in any case, I love this one, and if you want some fantasy adventure, this is a great book to choose. Following that is actually a series of 4 books, the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. The book series starts with The Shadow of the Wind, which is a fairly well-known novel. It's followed up by The Angel's Game, then The Prisoner of Heaven, and finally The Labyrinth of the Spirits, which is a hefty 800-page book. All 4 of these books are primarily set in Barcelona, and they definitely have a very different vibe of Spain than you normally see in books. In contrast to the sunny, fun, tourist destination version of Spain that you often see, the Spain you see in these books is much more dark and gloomy and mysterious. It's foggy and it's kind of melancholic, but it's a really fun set of books. If you like books that are about books and about a love of reading and about authors, these ones are definitely books you want to check out. They're all set in the first half of the 1900s, and they follow a cast of characters and the different timelines and how those timelines converge eventually, and they're a little bit mysterious and have just a hint of magic to them. Technically, each of the books does work as a standalone, and you can read them in any order that you want, but personally I recommend reading them in the order that the author published them in. Continuing with the same author, we have The City of Mist, which is a collection of short stories. Now sadly, Carlos Ruiz Zafón did die in 2020, and this is his posthumous collection. It first came out in Spanish in 2020, and then the English translation came out at the end of 2021. So that's what I got, and I actually just read this a few months ago. A lot of these stories do include some of the characters found in the book series I just mentioned, although they do completely work as standalones, and a lot of the other stories are completely standalones, and so you're not going to be missing anything by not having read the other series first. Like his other books, these stories are set primarily in Barcelona, and they have that kind of melancholic, spooky, foggy vibe of Spain that I was talking about. Finally, I have The Hollow Crown Duology by Zoraida Cordova. It starts off with Incendiary and ends with Illusionary. Like The Bird King, both of these books are set during a fantasy version of the Spanish Inquisition, and in this case, it's an inquisition from non-magic people against magic people. This book follows the people who have magic, and there are a few different types of magic that they can have, and it's a really exciting adventure involving breaking into palaces and sword fights, and a little bit of love too. And between you and me, I actually like Illusionary even more, so it's definitely a series where you want to read both books. I really love this one, and if you're like me and you want more fantasy Spain, this is one I highly recommend. Okay, now let's move on to the books that I haven't read yet and have on my TBR. Most of these I will try to read this month, but it is a pretty ambitious list, so I might not get through all of them. But in any case, I hope that some of these are interesting to you too. First up is Remember Me by Mario Escobar. He's a Spanish author, and this is translated from Spanish. It's set during the Spanish Civil War, and it follows this family who is living in Spain, and to keep their kids safe, they end up sending their kids to Mexico. It looks like a really moving story, and it follows his characters around Spain and to Mexico and eventually back to Spain, and this is definitely one that I'm planning to read first thing in the month. Next we have The Perfume Garden by Kate Lord Brown. I've had this one for a little while. I picked it up because it's set in Valencia, and as I said, I did live in Valencia for about a year, so I was really excited to read a book set there. This one has a dual timeline. Part of it is set during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, and the other part is set in the early 2000s. In the 2000s timeline, a woman travels from her home in England and ends up in Valencia looking for answers about her family history. This one looks like a beautiful historical fiction novel, and I am excited to read this one. It's also a good title for springtime weather because Perfume Garden makes you think of Mayflowers, so this is definitely a good one to read. Another one I'm really excited for is A Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende. This book came out about 2 years ago, and actually I saw an author event with the author right before the pandemic hit. It was a really inspiring and fun author event. Isabel Allende is so much fun. This book also starts off in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, and it follows these 2 people who end up marrying each other just to make their passage away from Spain easier, and they end up traveling to Chile. It follows as they try to build a family and a life in a new country, and it looks like a really moving and powerful novel. And although it's primarily set in Chile as opposed to Spain, it does still count in my opinion. And I have a lot of books by the author that I want to get to, but I want to start with this one, so hopefully I'll get to this one this month. Another book I've had for a few years is called The Snow Gypsy by Lindsay Jane Ashford. This one is set after World War II has ended, and a woman is looking for her missing brother. She hasn't seen him in 8 years, and the last time he was seen, he was fighting alongside Gypsy partisans in Spain. So this book takes place all over Spain. She's traveling the whole country looking for her brother, and it looks like a really interesting and fun adventure, and I'm highly looking forward to reading this one. I do hope that the writing is sensitive to the Romani people in here. We'll see, but I'm really looking forward to this one, and I will be reading this one in May. Another one I'm excited for is called The Fountain of Silence by Rotissa Pettis. This book came out in 2019, and I've been planning to read it ever since then. It's set in Madrid in the 1950s under the rule of Francisco Franco, and it follows a young American guy who travels to Spain, and while he's there, he's making connections with other people, including another young photographer. And it's about uncovering the past and seeing how the Spanish Civil War still has a hold on the Spanish people, and seeing kind of the darker side of this sunny city. This is definitely a book I plan to read this month, and I've heard great things about it. I also have a few other books by the author that I'm planning to read later this year, and so this is one that's really high on my list. There's also The Man with No Borders by Richard C Maurice. This is about a Spanish man who's living in the Swiss Alps, and he's estranged from his family, his adult sons, and it's about the family eventually reconnecting and uncovering what went wrong in the past and forming new connections now. It has kind of a dual timeline between the past and the present, the past being in the 1950s, I believe. And this looks like a really moving novel and one that I'm looking forward to reading soon. A book that just came out recently is The Wonders by Elena Medell. She's a Spanish author and it was just translated into English. And this book follows a few generations of women in Madrid and the kinds of changes that have happened in the decades between them. It's a pretty slim novel, a little bit over 200 pages, and I'm looking forward to reading this one. I haven't heard too much buzz about it, but it's pretty high on my list. If you're into thrillers, might I recommend The Silence of the White City by Eva Garcia Satins. This book is set in the north of Spain in País Vasco, and it follows an investigator who's trying to unravel a series of ritualistic murders in the area. This one looks pretty spooky, and it's also the first in a trilogy. The second two books are called The Water Rituals and The Lords of Time. So if you like this one, it has 2 more books that you can read right after, which I'm planning to get as soon as I read this one. So this one looks really fun, and I'm definitely into thrillers, so if I don't read it this month, I'll definitely read it sometime later this year. And finally, for those of you who like romance and happily ever afters, how about The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. This is another Spanish author, and this book is set in Spain. It follows a woman who is living in America, and she travels back to Spain for a wedding, and she has to bring along a plus one, and they're kind of enemies, but we're going to see how they eventually fall in love with each other. So this book looks really cute and fun, and actually the author has another book coming out in a few months, so I do want to read this one right now so I can read the other one as soon as it's out. Oh, I have 2 more that I forgot to mention, which I don't have physical copies of, but I have them as ebooks. First is a book called Rabbit Island by Elvira Navarro. It's a collection of short stories, and they range in genres like horror and fantasy, which are 2 genres that I love, so I'm very excited to read this one. The author is Spanish and it is translated, and so I am planning to read this one very soon. Another book that came out recently is called North to Paradise by Osman Umar. This is a memoir by a Ghanaian author. It's about his travels from a rural village in Ghana up through Africa through the Sahara Desert, and eventually how he ends up in Spain, specifically in Barcelona. And then eventually he goes back to Ghana. So I don't read very many memoirs, but this one really looked interesting to me, and I'm very excited to read this one. I'm planning to read this one this month as well. So those are some of the books that I've read, the books that I want to read, including standalones and some series, and I'm just really excited for this whole reading challenge. I hope that some of these books look interesting to you, and if you have any other books that are set in Spain that you want to recommend, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know what you recommend. I'm always looking for more books that are set in Spain, and so I would be delighted to know what other books are out there that I'm missing. And I do hope that you'll join in this reading challenge. The April challenge just ended, and I'll put a video about that out in a few days. And I have challenges for each month of the year for the rest of the year, so I'm really excited about that, and I hope that you'll participate. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And then make sure you don't miss any more of my videos. Please ring the bell to get all my notifications. I put out about 2 to 3 videos each week, including videos like this one, including listicles and vlogs, as well as monthly wrap-ups, and maybe soon some book hauls and book unhauls, so we'll see about that. In any case, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!